In today's episode, I'll be reading chapters 7 and 8 of the Trust Premium, which mark a key transition into part 2 of the book. Up until now, I focused on why trust is so important, how to reduce fear, mitigate risk, and influence decisions. Now we shift into a deeper question: what is trust really? I'll start by defining trust in a clear, practical way, one that goes beyond vague notions of honesty and reliability. Then we'll break down the 8 laws of trust, which explain how trust actually behaves, especially in the customer-provider relationship. These laws challenge common assumptions and reveal why trust isn't just a binary concept. It's continuous, contextual, personal, and even transferable. By the end of this episode, you'll have a new perspective on trust, not as an abstract ideal, but as a measurable, dynamic force that shapes every interaction with your customers. Let's dive in right after this. Welcome to The Trust Show. I'm Yoram Solomon, your host, the author of the Book of Trust and facilitator of the Trust Habits Workshop. My mission is simple. I want to help you form habits that build your trustworthiness, because the answer to this question will have the biggest impact on your personal and professional success or failure. Can I trust you? Part 2. How to Gain Trust. Chapter 7. What is trust and why is it important? Risk, fear, and trust. Risk and reward are inseparable. The opportunities that we pursue, whether in life or business, come with inherent risks that must be confronted to reap their benefits. You've likely heard of the saying, "no risk, no reward." It reflects the universal truth. The greater the potential reward, the greater the risk we must take to achieve it. Whether it's investing in a stock market, embarking on a new venture, or simply trying something unfamiliar, risk is always part of the equation. However, our willingness to embrace risk varies significantly. Each of us has a unique risk tolerance shaped by our circumstances, values, and experiences. For example, my daughter Maya performs on the trapeze at the circus, a feat well within her risk tolerance. Mine, however, halts halfway up the ladder leading to the platform. It's not the objective risk of falling that holds me back. It's my subjective fear of that risk. Risk is, after all, objective. It can often be quantified or measured. Fear, on the other hand, is deeply personal. I'll revert back to the example of the 2 individuals, each asked to invest $10,000 in the stock market. The fear of loss might be paralyzing for someone whose entire savings amount to $10,000. In contrast, someone with $1 million in the bank may view the same risk as manageable. Beyond financial standing, other factors like how much value one places on money also shape fear and risk tolerance. Interestingly, when I asked 426 survey participants about their comfort with taking risks, their responses highlight how deeply personal and varied the subject is. While 48% said they feel comfortable taking risks, more than half of them, 26%, only somewhat agreed. On the other hand, 30% admitted they don't feel comfortable taking risks at all. These findings underscored the complexity of our relationship with risk, both in how we perceive it and how we navigate it. However, it is also worth noting that 10% of the survey respondents strongly agreed that they feel comfortable taking risks, while 8% strongly disagreed, further making the point that we are very diverse in our risk tolerance. When the rewards we seek come with risks beyond our comfort zone, we look for something or someone to bridge that gap. This is where trust comes in. Trust functions as a stabilizing force, enabling us to move forward despite our fears. It lets us rely on three primary entities: ourselves, a higher power, or other people. In a professional context, trust in others extends to individuals or organizations. For example, you may not know your Uber driver personally, but you trust them because you trust Uber as the company vetting and employing them. This distribution of trust varies for everyone and is influenced by the context of the situation. Trust has profound implications when it comes to a customer choosing a provider. Trust reduces the subjective fear tied to the objective risks a customer faces when making a purchasing decision. These risks might involve financial loss, wasted time, unmet expectations, or damage to their reputation. Trust acts as a bridge over these uncertainties, allowing customers to move forward confidently. For providers, trust is more than a nice to have. It's essential. A trustworthy provider lowers the perceived risk, making it easier for customers to engage. Even if the trusted provider charges more or takes longer to deliver, customers often prefer them over someone less trustworthy. Why? Because trust transforms a risky decision into a confident one, justifying the investment of time, money, and energy. People prefer to buy from someone they trust and are even willing to pay a premium for that trust. In this way, trust elevates the relationship between provider and customer. It shifts the provider's role from simply offering goods or services to providing reassurance and reliability. Trust doesn't just facilitate a single transaction. It fosters long-term loyalty, repeat business, and the kind of customer advocacy that fuels growth. So, why do we need trust? It's because trust minimizes fear and risk, giving us the confidence to pursue rewards that might otherwise feel out of reach. For customers, trust is not a luxury. It's the foundation of every decision they make. To continue the discussion about trust and how it affects preference and premium, I feel that I must give you my definition of trust. Trust is your willingness to accept the possibility of negative consequences from giving control over something you have to another person, expecting them to minimize that possibility. Let's break it down. Trust is a voluntary decision. You decide if you are willing to trust or not. Circumstances might be such that you have no better alternatives, but the decision to trust is still yours. You need to trust because there could be potential negative consequences or risks. Trusting someone will allow you to accept that potential. Trusting the other person means giving them control over something you have or otherwise control yourself, such as your money, time, job security, or even your life. You may trust yourself, which is only a change in your risk tolerance bar, God, or other people. Sometimes you trust people you know, and sometimes you trust people you don't know through transferrable trust. Do you really know the people who built and maintained the plane you are about to board? You trust them without knowing them because you trust the airline or aircraft manufacturer. Trusting them means that you have an expectation that they would minimize the possibility of negative consequences. To do that, they must have the capacity or capability to reduce the risk, the willingness, and the knowledge that you or someone in your place trust them. Let me adapt my definition of trust to the trust that your customer has in you. Trust is the customer's willingness to accept the possibility of not getting the expected value, losing their money, and other possible negative consequences by giving it to you while expecting you to deliver the expected value. Now, let's find out how trust behaves through the 8 laws of trust in the next chapter, and later, what makes your current and prospective customers trust you, or anyone else for that matter. Chapter 8. The 8 Laws of Trust. Over the years, as I started researching trust, I observed 8 laws of trust. I didn't make them up or invent them, I simply observed them. This is how trust behaves. And it's different than anything you ever knew about trust. They are covered in greater detail in the Book of Trust and the Mini Book of Trust, but to have a good understanding of how your customers think about trust, I included them here in the context of a relationship between your customer, current and new, and you, and their trust preference and trust premium. Trust law number 1, trust is continuous. We use the word trust in sentences in the following manner. Your customer trusts you. My customer doesn't trust me. We look at it as a binary. In reality, trust is continuous. There are different levels of trust. Your customer may trust you when purchasing a $20 item, but not when investing $10,000 through you. The level of trust that your customer has in you, as well as the level of trust they have in your competitor, affects the trust preference and trust premium they grant you, and possibly even the no-trust discount that you must offer to get a new customer or keep an existing one. Don't assume your customer completely trusts you or doesn't trust your competitor at all. Both trust preference and trust premium depend on the difference in the trust level your customer, current or new, has in you and in your competitor. Your customer may trust you slightly more or slightly less than your competitor, which will warrant a smaller trust premium and trust preference. Hopefully, you will learn from this book how to increase your customers' trust in you, and hopefully, your competitor doesn't know what you learned here. If the customer trusts your competitor as much as they trust you, you may not have trust preference or trust premium. Hopefully, they don't trust your competitor more than they trust you, or you will have to offer a no-trust discount. You don't want that. Trust law number 2, trust is contextual. I have already given you a few examples of that. The trust you must have in a house painter is different than the trust you must have in a surgeon or a pilot. The trust you must have in a wedding photographer differs from that in a studio photographer in a headshot project. Context matters. Both your customer's personal context and the industry context. As you saw from my research, the context affected both how customers consider the trustworthiness of the salesperson and the conversion of that into trust preference and trust premium. Trust law number 3, trust is personal. Our brains keep looking for shortcuts. We would love to see a standard, universal, absolute checklist of what would make you trusted by all customers. Unfortunately, there is no such a list, and trust is nuanced and different for different people. In fact, the same behavior that would cause one customer to trust you could cause another customer to distrust you. The same behavior. Here is a small example. When I worked at Texas Instruments, I found that my direct supervisor and I would often get into arguments. I felt that she didn't trust me as much. Whenever I wanted to propose something, it was as if she immediately developed an allergic reaction to it before I even had the opportunity to explain why it was necessary. Frustrated, I once asked her why she had developed such an adverse reaction to what I had suggested almost every time. "It's because I didn't see any rationale for what you were proposing," she replied. "But that's because you didn't give me a chance to tell you my rationale," I exclaimed. However, after thinking about this for a minute, I asked her, "When I propose something, Would you like me to start with the bottom line first and then explain my rationale? Or start with my thought process and end with the bottom line? To my surprise, she wanted me to start with my thought process and only close with the bottom line. I guess that's why it's called the bottom line. Whenever I opened with the bottom line, she found 1,000 reasons why I could be wrong, and those reasons caused a bias. I lost her right after I started with the bottom line. To me, you must begin with the bottom line, or I won't have the context to listen to the rest. If you start with the bottom line, it gives me context, and now I can listen to whether you can substantiate your conclusion. The bottom line at the beginning focuses my attention on specific things about your explanations. I get lost if you start with your thought process because I don't know where you are going with it. The problem was simple. My boss and I had different preferences for the order of things. That was it. Which one of us was wrong? None. Again, this is not a case of universal good or bad. It's a case of being individually different. In a quick, informal survey, I found that 74% of the participants, myself included, preferred to hear the bottom line first. 17% preferred to listen to the thought process first, and 9% didn't have a preference one way or another. Which one are you? If you and I were both in the 74% who prefer to hear the bottom line first, or if we were both in the 17% who prefer to listen to the rationale first, or if one or both of us were in the 9% who could process it equally either way, we would get along just fine. However, if one of us was among the 74% who prefer to hear the bottom line first, and the other in the 17% who prefers the bottom line last, we would not get along and would not trust each other in that sense. Based on the survey results, I concluded that 25.2% of the time, two people will not see eye to eye based on this factor alone. That's 1 in 4 relationships, and that's only one factor. Once I learned that she preferred me to take her through my thought process first and only give her the bottom line at the end, I changed how I communicated with her, and her trust in me increased significantly. It was important enough for me to change this behavior. It was within my capability to change, and I knew I had to change it. So I did. And that's an important note. To change a behavior, you must know that you have to change it. It must be important enough for you to be willing to change it, because trust me, it takes a lot of effort to change a behavior, and you must have the capacity to do it. This concept will be repeated several times in this book, and in part 4, I will equip you with a process of forming new habits that will change old behaviors to help you build that capacity. Do your customers process information differently? Do they prefer you ask questions first, or do they prefer you provide information first? Different customers are different, and if you try the same sales techniques on all of them, you will find that some may trust you, while others might distrust you for exactly the same behaviors and techniques. I realize that this understanding makes being trustworthy harder. No longer do standard sales techniques work. Some things may work on all customers, and some may not. That's how trust works, and the sooner you realize that, the sooner you will be trusted by your customers. Trust law number 4. Trust is asymmetrical. The simplest way to describe this law is that your trust in the customer, and trust me, you do need to trust your customer, is not the same as the trust that the customer has in you. When I talk about trust law number 8, I will explain that the level of trust that one person, A, has in another, B, is the product of the second person's trustworthiness and the first person's trustfulness, willingness to trust people in general. The trust you have in your customer is the product of the customer's trustworthiness and your trustfulness. In contrast, the trust that your customer has in you is the product of your trustworthiness and the customer's trustfulness. Those are four independent variables that are not directly related. Therefore, trusting your customers, even if you show them that you trust them, will not mean that they will trust you. You have to work on that separately. Trust law number 5, trust is transferrable. This one is a biggie for the initial acquisition of a customer. Many years ago, if we wanted to buy something or hire someone to perform a job, all we had to do was open the thick yellow pages book, find the right category, pick up the phone, and call them. For the most part, you could trust them to do the work, with few exceptions. However, times have changed. Today, information is at our fingertips on the internet, but so are uncertainty, misrepresentation, deception, and scams. With an abundance of scams and low ethics and no integrity professionals, if you can even call them that, how can you know whom to trust? Let's assume that the starting point of trust is 0 or very close to it. Unless someone the customer already trusts vouches for the professional, there is little to no initial trust. This is where transferable trust comes into play. When someone the customer trusts, whether a friend, a colleague, or a community, vouches for a provider, that trust is transferred. Based on my research, which I described earlier in this book, participants indicated that any source of transferable trust significantly increases their likelihood of hiring a professional, ranging from "I'm more likely to hire them" to "I'm much more likely to hire them." The foundation of transferable trust can be categorized into the 4 R's. Reviews and ratings. Anonymous feedback from many people where the customer looks at the overall rating and the number of reviews. A high score with thousands of reviews signals credibility, even if the reviews are strangers. A few reviews may indicate that those reviews were sponsored. Reviews on the provider's website are suspicious, whereas reviews on objective websites such as Trustpilot, Yelp, and others are considered more reliable. Recommendations. Recommendations requested by the customer from trusted individuals. These carry more weight because they come from people the customer already trusts and respects organically and were not initiated by the provider. Sometimes, a thought leader or a celebrity would recommend something, and even though the customer doesn't have a personal relationship with them, they trust them even if they have no real experience or expertise in the field where the customer wishes to trust them. References. Contacts provided by the provider for previous customers who are willing to speak on their behalf. While valuable, these references are often viewed with caution since the provider selects them and the customer may not yet trust these individuals. Still, it allows the customers to ask questions about the provider's work. Reputation. The general perception of the provider's trustworthiness is built by multiple previous customers over time. A strong reputation, especially one reinforced by word of mouth, serves as a significant trust accelerator. The word that comes in mind is brand. And again, Jeff Bezos' definition comes to mind: what people say about you when you are not in the room. Another quote I like is, "Your reputation arrives before you do." It takes a long time and many customers to build a reputation. These 4 R's form the cornerstone of transferable trust, helping customers move past the initial zero trust baseline and increasing their likelihood of engaging with a provider. The presence of any of these elements signals reliability, creating a critical bridge between skepticism and confidence. It's important to remember that the transferable trust discussed here is the inbound transferable trust, which influences the customer's trust premium before their purchase decision. However, inbound transferable trust doesn't exist in isolation. It is generated by the outbound transferable trust created by others through their prior interaction with the provider. The reviewers, referencers, recommenders, and others who contribute to the provider's reputation are all reflecting their own experiences. This cycle of outbound trust transforming into inbound trust is essential for building and sustaining a provider's credibility in the marketplace. The stronger the outbound trust created by previous customers, the more impactful the inbound trust becomes for new ones. I wrote a lot about the roles of inbound and outbound transferable trust in Chapter 3, the purchase decision and beyond. Transferable trust is a critical component of the provider-customer relationship and purchase decision. I must add one more element to consider. The inbound transferable trust is the product of the outbound transferable trust and the trust that the potential customer has in the person providing the outbound transferable trust, or the trust transfer. The outbound transferable trust is meaningless if the prospective customer doesn't trust the person providing the outbound transferable trust, resulting in zero inbound transferable trust. Inbound transferable trust is maximized when the prospective customer trusts the person providing the outbound transferable trust a lot. I will say more in Chapter 16. Trust law number 6. Trust is reciprocal. Frankly, this law is less relevant to the provider-customer relationship than in other relationships. You can read much more about it in the Book of Trust and the Mini Book of Trust, but for now, I'll just explain that if you trust someone and show them that you trust them, they will behave in a more trustworthy way. Unfortunately, the opposite works too. If you distrust someone, or even if you trust them but just don't show them that you trust them, they will behave in a less trustworthy way. Again, this law applies to situations where you need to trust someone and want to influence their trustworthiness, but it is less applicable to situations where your business success relies on the customer's trust in you and not the other way around. Trust law number 7, trust is dynamic. Trust doesn't stay constant. It changes all the time. It changes the fastest during interactions between your customers and you. Even little things you do during that interaction quickly changes their trust in you for better or worse. Later, when I discuss the relative trust model, I will talk more about the components of who you are, which are the components that affect your trustworthiness in the eyes of the customer. However, your customer's trust in you changes between interactions too. It can change due to trust transferability. They hear something about you through someone else, but it also changes simply because of time. Unfortunately, if you don't do anything between interactions with the customers to maintain or increase trust in you, it will only change for the worse. There is a defense mechanism that we have, which, when you haven't talked to someone in a while, causes you to trust them less. Maybe they have changed. Maybe their values have changed. Maybe their priorities have changed. Perhaps they don't care about me as much as they did the last time I saw them. That's what your customers feel about you when you haven't been in touch with them for a while. Their trust in you slowly erodes. It's not something you have done, it's simply the passing of time. Trust law number 8. Trust is two-sided. I mentioned this law before when I talked about the asymmetry of trust. It explains the erosion of trust due to increased spam and scam emails and phone calls. Trust is not a one-person game like solitaire. Trust is a two-person game. The person who trusts, the trustor, and the person who is being trusted, the trustee. The level of trust that your customer, the trustor, has in you is the product of your trustworthiness and their trustfulness. You may be the most trustworthy person in the world. There is no such thing because trust is relative, and the same behavior that would cause one person to trust you could cause another person to distrust you. See trust law number 3. But the customer may still not be willing to trust you. It's not just you. It's people in general, or salespeople if you are a salesperson, or financial advisors if you're a financial advisor. We are the sum of our experiences. Your customer may have had a bad experience with a salesperson before, or many bad experiences. As a result, they generalize their experiences to all salespeople, all financial advisors, all insurance agents, or maybe all people. It's not your fault. You may be perfectly trustworthy according to their criteria, but they just don't trust people like you. When I started my work on trust, I used to say that you can do everything about your trustworthiness, but nothing about the other person's trustfulness. Today, I know that it's not exactly true. It's just that there is very little that you can do to affect your customer's trustfulness. It's an uphill battle if you're up to it. You will be competing with the low trustworthiness of everyone who came before you. You know that when you want to break up with a boyfriend or girlfriend and don't want them to feel bad about it, you say, "It's not you, it's me." This time, it's not you. It is actually them. But it's something you have to keep in mind. Well, this wraps up today's episode where we explored Chapter 7 and 8 of the Trust Premium and transition from why trust is so important to what trust really is. We broke down my definition of trust and introduced the 8 laws of trust, which explain how trust behaves, especially in the customer-provider relationship. Just a quick recap, the 8 laws of trust are: 1. Trust is continuous. It's not binary. Trust exists on a spectrum. 2. Trust is contextual. The level of trust depends on the situation. 3. Trust is personal. What builds trust for one person might not work for another. Number 4, trust is asymmetrical. The trust you have in someone isn't necessarily the trust they have in you. Law number 5, trust is transferrable. Trust can be gained or lost based on recommendations, reviews, and reputation. 6, trust is reciprocal. People tend to act more trustworthy when they feel trusted. Number 7, trust is dynamic. It changes over time, either strengthening or eroding. Number 8, trust is two-sided. It depends on both the trustor's willingness to trust and the trustee's trustworthiness. Next week, we'll take this even further and dive into what specifically makes a customer trust you. We'll explore the key factors that influence trust and how you can strengthen it to build lasting relationships and earn a trust premium. I hope this gave you a new perspective on trust and trust premium. May trust be with you. This was The Trust Show. What would you like to know about trust and trustworthiness? Let me know and I'll answer it in a future episode. I would love to hear from you. Email me at yoram@thetrustshow.com. If you like this episode, subscribe to the show so you will automatically get notified when I release a new episode. Rate it. Write a review for this podcast because those ratings help not only you, but also others looking for podcasts just like this. If you're looking for more resources to learn about how to build trust, be trusted, or know who to trust, look up my workshops, online courses, books, or go to my website, trusthabits.com. And remember that the answer to these two questions will have the biggest impact on your personal and professional success or failure. Can I trust you, and can you trust me? Thank you for listening or watching The Trust Show.